Okay, greetings friends. Welcome to a brief web lecture on the anatomy of a scientific journal article. In this web lecture, I'm going to go through the typical structure of a scientific journal article to hopefully try to make these articles, which you will have to read quite a few, a little bit easier to read, and when it comes time to write one, hopefully make them a little bit easier to write. Scientific journal articles have a consistent structure. They're all pretty much put together the same way. It's not like Walk in the Woods. It's not like a magical, mysterious journey with all kinds of hidden doors and detours and side roads. It's more like climbing a flight of stairs. You're at the bottom. You want to get to the top. At the top, you will know something that you didn't know at the bottom. And there's one direct way to get there, one step at a time. And specifically, a scientific journal article has 5 of these steps, 5 sections. And each section has a consistent and distinct purpose that gets you one step closer to knowing something new. And I will call these sections Introduction, Lit Review, Methods, Results, and Conclusion, but as we will see in some examples, they are sometimes called different things. Now, you might see scientific journal articles that look completely different because, for example, they are only based on making an argument from research that has been done previously, or they criticize a particular point of view. This lecture and the scientific articles I'm talking about are based only on empirical data, meaning the author of these articles went out and observed tourists' behavior through interviews, through a questionnaire, through direct observation, something like that, and then wrote that into a scientific article. Most of the articles you will come across are indeed based on data, based on some observation of tourist behavior, and that's the kind of article I will be talking about today. Just like a flight of stairs that gets you from the bottom to the top, the 5 sections of a typical scientific journal article form a coherent, logical argument. So they want to convince you of a certain point. They want to give you that view from the top of the stairs. Roughly, the pieces of this argument, the different steps are that the paper takes on something important, an important topic, that previous knowledge on this topic was missing, was somehow incomplete, and thus a new data collection, new observations of tourist behavior were necessary. This data collection was done well. There's a clear view on the data. The data obviously say something on this topic. And when you look at the data the right way, they fill in the missing knowledge, the knowledge that was missing from previous research on the topic. The findings are useful for the industry, and the findings give ideas for future research on this topic. So let's go through it step by step. The introduction clarifies the topic and its importance. The purpose of this section is to show that the paper is going to take on something important, that the topic is somehow meaningful, significant, that it's a problem for industry. The next section, the literature review, synthesizes and criticizes previous research. So previous research, other scientific articles, represent what we know about a topic at that particular point in time. So the author always goes back and looks at what we know about a particular topic and says, look, we know something, but we need to know something more. And so I have to go out and collect questionnaires from tourists or whatever so that we learn something new because, again, this is an important topic and we know something, but it's not enough. Now at this point, if you've written something like a thesis before, you probably remember you spent a lot of time refining your research questions or a problem statement. You probably had a lot of frustration with that because it's difficult to do the first time. And you're wondering, in this 5-step structure, I've never mentioned the research questions or a problem analysis or the study aims. Where does this stuff go? Sometimes it goes at the end of the introduction, but especially in empirical, academic journal articles, the way the argument works is there is sort of a general topic, and that's important. Like we'll see in an example, the role of social media in tourists' decision making. That's an important topic. You know, social media is important. Everyone's on social media these days. So that's the first part of the argument. Now, there's some research on how tourists use social media. It's the literature. But we still don't know how tourists use social media in their decision making. So that's the knowledge that's missing. Then the argument is perfectly set up for the authors to ask a very specific research question. Like, how do Dutch tourists use social media when planning their holiday in the summer of 2013, for example? So usually in empirical academic journal articles, you see study aims and or research questions and or hypotheses, whatever, here at the end of the literature review. Then the authors move on to the methods. The methods section describes how data were collected and analyzed. And again, it's not just a dry description. The purpose is to make an argument to show that this data collection was done well. Now, the one section that tends to be a little bit dry and boring sometimes is the results section, because the results section describes just the direct findings from the data analysis. So the purpose is to give a clear view on the data. You know, when you have data like from a questionnaire, you just open the data file. Usually you've got like an Excel spreadsheet. It's got hundreds of rows, hundreds of columns, a lot of numbers, and you can't make any sense of it. The purpose of the results section is just to tell you, what do those numbers mean? What do they say? With, let's say, a study based on in-depth interviews, the raw data would be hundreds and hundreds of pages of interview transcripts. You're not going to read through them all and try to figure out what they mean. You may not even be able to. In fact, they may even be in a different language. The point of the results section is to organize the interesting bits from those interviews into themes and to make it clear to you what the interviews actually show. And then comes the most important and the most complex section of a scientific research article, which is the conclusion. It gives the author's interpretation of the data. And here it serves 3 different purposes, and you will see all 3 in every scientific paper. Otherwise, it really almost can't get published. But these 3 often come in a different order, usually in the order shown here, but sometimes they're switched around or mixed together. A part called the discussion often shows that the results fill in the missing knowledge. So you remember the literature review said, well, there's some knowledge on a topic and the knowledge is incomplete. We need to find out something more. In the discussion, the author says, now we have found out something more. We have found out that part that was missing. Then there are some recommendations that suggest new ideas to industry, so how people in the tourism business should act based on the author's interpretation of the data. And finally, there are some implications that suggest directions for future research. And those are only a few sentences, but very interesting. Okay, at this point, I'd like to open up 3 different scientific journal articles and just walk you through these different sections and try to pick out a few sentences that reveal what these papers are about. You'll notice I have 2 of my own examples in here, both based on my PhD. I don't show them to you out of arrogance. It's more because I'm familiar with how the papers were structured and why I put various things in various places, so it's just a little easier for me to explain those. Okay, so one quantitative research paper from Leisure Sciences, another quantitative research paper about social media from Tourism Management. It's not mine. It's a very nice paper. And a qualitative paper from Annals of Tourism Research. So let's have a look and let's see if we can recognize that 5-step argument in each of these papers. Okay. Let's look at this one first. Okay. So this is from Leisure Sciences. There's the title. There are my co-authors. This little part in italics, this is called an abstract. It's just a summary of the main points of the article, and the keywords are there for database searches. Now, in this article, the text begins right away with a definition of tourism, and it's the world's largest industry, blah, blah, blah. This is the beginning of the introduction. And very quickly, I say, hey, this is an important topic. What's the topic? Well, the experiences of leisure travelers, important to the travel industry, etc., have received substantial research, attention, growing recognition that positive emotions, which this paper is about, have a central yet understudied role in the leisure travel experience. So this paper is about positive emotions. They are important. Okay? And the rest is just details until we get to the literature review. In the literature review, I pull together all the previous research about positive emotions, and I make the argument that something from the previous research on positive emotions in tourism is missing. So first definitions, then quite general positive emotions, more specific positive emotions in leisure travel, organized in some subsections, and then, like I promised, the literature review ends with a statement of purpose. That's where I'm getting real specific and telling you this is exactly what the paper is about. And finally, the most specific place in the paper, a statement of 2 hypotheses, 1 and 2. Then the methods section, I'm making an argument that my methods were good. So I collected questionnaires from 25 people. That's not many. So I have to make all kinds of arguments that it's okay. The sample provided geographic, socioeconomic, etc. variety, so there were lots of different people among the 25. People aged 45 and older, it's an important population. So I'm arguing that I collected good data. And it's fairly detailed here. And then I have a results section labeled results. And the results section is structured according to my 2 hypotheses. And you often see this in quantitative research. If you have 3 research questions, you'll have 3 sections in results, 1 for each research question. Also in a quantitative paper, you often see some graphs like this and some tables like this. And if you just look at the graphs and tables, you basically understand what the findings say, and the text explains it. And the tables can be read on their own, and you should understand them. And the text, you should be able to read on its own and understand it. Okay, then the first part of the conclusion, called the discussion, again has the purpose to say, you know how something was missing from previous knowledge? Well, I found it. So here I specifically talk about 3 ways that my findings extend research linking positive emotions to leisure travel. And I have 3 subsections for those. I also have a little part called limitations, where I talk about things I did in my study that maybe weren't that good, or mean that you can only interpret the findings so much. There's still some knowledge missing in spite of what I contributed. And then I have a section called the conclusion. And in this section that I called the conclusion here, I have a part called implications for practice. These are the recommendations to the tourism industry and the issues for future research. And typically that's where the paper ends. Okay, and after that you have the list of all the references that were cited throughout the paper. Alright, let's look at the one about social media. Okay, here the text is a little small, maybe we can zoom in just a bit. Okay, again we have title, authors, and abstract. And keywords, here the introduction is actually labeled as an introduction. What's this article about? Well, the internet has fundamentally reshaped everything, and there are 2 mega trends that have emerged on the internet: social media websites, and searching has become an increasingly dominant mode in travelers' use of the internet. So, we're talking about searching and social media. Everyone's doing that nowadays, so it's an important topic. Okay, we are convinced. Their literature review is not labeled a literature review, it's labeled research background. Here they go into a literature review. They have something here called a research rationale, where they try to give some arguments that the topic is important. Then they have another section called Understanding the Role of Social Media in Online Travel Information Search. This is actually more literature review. Okay. And it's at the end of this that we're going to find our research questions. 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and 2C. Methodology and research design is the methods section. They tell you basically what they did was a lot of very well organized Googling. Then they kept track of the different hits they got. And they have really a lot of detail because it's an unusual research method, so they have to explain it very well. Their results section is called findings. Again, you have this lovely pie chart that quickly gives you a picture of what they found, and also some tables. And again, you can get a lot of meaning just from looking at the tables, but the explanation is in the text. Okay, here's the next section. That's the discussion. Again, in the discussion, They are making the argument that whatever was missing from previous research on social media and information search, they found their study has put in there. And then they have a part called conclusions and implications. And here they're summarizing some of their findings. They're still talking about what they contributed to the previous research. And then here at some point they sort of transition gradually to talking about the travel industry and how the travel industry can use their findings. For example, they say, finally, this study provides insights into the means by which tourism marketers can tap into the social information space, and so forth. Okay, and it seems that at the end here, maybe we missed it, but they're really focusing on implications for the tourism industry and not so much, if at all, on implications for future research. Sometimes authors make comments about that and they're just spread throughout the conclusion and discussion sections. Okay, and finally let's look at a qualitative one. Annals of Tourism Research. Jokes build community. Mature tourist positive emotions. Okay, author's abstract. Keywords. There, I was clever enough to label my introduction. So you know you're getting a little introduction here. And then there's a big sort of level 1 heading, positive emotions in mature adult tourists. And a lot of different things start there. But first, of course, the literature review. And the literature review will have 3 sections. You know that because I say 3 bodies of research form a conceptual foundation for the present study. So here's literature review part 1, 2, and 3. And again, study purpose. And this time you have no research questions, no hypotheses, just a statement of purpose. The purpose of this study was twofold: to examine the processes that link social context to positive emotions, and to explain the degree and variety of positive emotions. Then I have a section called Study Methods. That's where I explain my methods. One thing you see in this paper that you see in a lot of qualitative research papers is a lot of information about context. So I observed the war between the state's learning tour and the Sandhills Free Flight Model Airplane Contest. And so I gave a lot of contextual background that you don't really see in, typical questionnaire research. Okay. Now here it's a little tricky because right at this point I finish with the methods, finish talking about how I analyze my data, and I start talking about the results. But the section is not called results or findings or what I found. It's called 4 processes create positive emotions. So you actually have to read the text a little bit to figure out, oh, this is where they stop talking about what they did, about how they collected the data. Now they're talking about actually what the data have to say. Analysis of ethnographic field note data uncovered 4 processes. Okay, so that gives you the hint. Oh, now they're talking about what the data actually shows. So that's how you know it's the results section. Often with qualitative research, instead of being structured according to questions or hypotheses, the results are structured according to themes. So here there were 4 processes, 4 themes: amusement, warmth, interest, and sublime reactions. So those are the 4 sections in the paper. So you notice here, no charts, no graphs, no numbers, just a lot of text, a lot of quite detailed description, also quotes, what people said. That's typical of a qualitative research paper. Here's a bit of a summary. So I've gone through the 4 themes: connections among processes. Then we have a section called the discussion. And again, like in the other 2 papers that we've seen, this section called discussion is about taking that previous knowledge from which something was missing and making the argument, hey, what was missing from the previous knowledge? I found it. I filled in that missing knowledge. And just to give you a little example here, our findings, our findings partially confirm yet also extend this SES theory. Basically, SES theory says that when people are older, they start thinking about how they're not going to live forever anymore. They stop making new friends, and they start focusing on the friendships and the family that they already have. And that's just not true. And there's quite a number of leisure and tourism studies that have shown that even when people are quite old and they're thinking about death and they're thinking about their legacy, they still continue to make new friends. So that's one of the contributions of this, and also many other papers, to the discussion about how older people make friends. So here we make other points like that. And then there's a section called the conclusion. And as with the paper that we just saw, even though it's the conclusion, we already had the discussion, I'm still reinforcing the argument that there was something missing from the previous knowledge, and I have added some new knowledge into that whole scientific conversation. But then I have a section called Implications for Practice. This is where the paper makes some recommendations for how the travel industry should do things differently based on these findings. And at the end, a little part called Future Directions. Future directions for what? As you now know, it's future directions for someone who might want to do more research on older adults and their positive emotions. And again, a list of references used. So friends, that's the anatomy of a research paper.